My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 62 years old, a retired school teacher, and I've been a widow for 7 quiet, heavy years. I live alone in a modest house full of memories, some warm, some aching, but most shaped by the love I poured into raising my only son, Aaron. A few months ago, I gave Aaron and his wife Sophia a fully paid home. No mortgage, no debt. I told myself it was a gift of love, a foundation for their growing family. I chose the paint colors myself, assembled furniture in my garage, even sewed the curtains by hand. It wasn't just a house, it was a piece of me. So when I received a message from Aaron that morning, my hands trembled in a way I hadn't felt since the day we buried his father. The screen glowed with a simple sentence. You won't be joining us on the family cruise. Sophia prefers to keep it just family. Just family. And somehow I wasn't part of that anymore. I sat in my kitchen, the scent of untouched coffee surrounding me, reading the words again. My fingers were stiff and cold. I typed a single word back, okay, for letters, but they carried everything. Hurt, shock, disbelief, and the painful realization that I was good enough to buy their house, but not good enough to sit at their dinner table. Not good enough to stand beside them on a cruise ship filled with sunlight and laughter. Something inside me broke quietly. The part of me that made excuses for their distance, their selective love, their absence. That part crumbled completely. The morning light crawled across the kitchen floor, touching the wooden chairs I had refinished by hand. Chairs where Aaron once sat with scraped knees and endless questions about the stars. That little boy was gone. In his place was a man who drew invisible boundaries I was no longer allowed to cross. The house felt unfamiliar, almost hostile, like a museum of my own bad decisions. On the walls hung photos I had paid for, smiles captured during vacations I had fully funded. Disneyland when Aaron was 7, Cancun when Sophia first joined the family, a cozy cabin trip I insisted on paying for one Christmas. Back then I called it generosity. Now all I saw were receipts disguised as memories. I remembered the housewarming party I had planned and paid for. Sophia had taken my hands with a tearful smile. Evelyn, you didn't have to do this. You'll always have a room here. And I had believed her. Because mothers believe. But belief can blind you. I had spent evenings repainting their bedroom while they were at work, choosing lavender because Sophia said it was calming. I hung new curtains, arranged pillows, set up lamps. Every corner of that house carried my fingerprints. But behind my helpfulness was denial, thick and suffocating. The next morning, the silence in my house pressed down harder than ever. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, invasive, reminding me of everything I had ignored for too long. My hands twitched slightly as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched coffee. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I reached for the phone and dialed Linda, my oldest friend. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. She simply said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And she was. That's the thing about friends who know you inside out. They don't need explanations. Linda stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding mine. Without preamble, she said softly, All right, Evelyn, tell me. I slid my phone across the table, my fingers reluctant to speak. Linda picked it up, read the message, and her jaw tightened. Not in surprise, but in recognition. She had seen this coming long before I had. They've been planning this, she said, calm but firm. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. I thought, maybe it's just Sophia. Maybe she influenced him. Aaron wouldn't do this to me, would he? Linda reached across the table, taking my hand gently. Her eyes carried the mix of truth and love that only a lifelong friend could provide. You raised a good boy, she said. But you also raised a boy who never had to struggle. He always had you fixing everything. Sophia saw that. She saw what she could shape him into. I looked away, heart tightening. You made yourself small, Evelyn. And now they treat you like you belong there. Small, invisible. Her words stung because they were true. For years, I had buried myself in usefulness, thinking it would earn me love. Instead, it made me disappear. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing Linda's voice echoing, "They've been planning this." At 2:17 a.m., I finally got up and walked to the kitchen. The glow of my laptop illuminated the room. For years, Sophia had handled most of my online accounts. "It's easier this way," she would say in that syrupy voice. And I had believed her because believing was easier than doubt. But tonight, I logged in with eyes wide open. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Checking, savings, retirement accounts, all intact. No large withdrawals, nothing alarming. But danger rarely shows itself in bold letters. It hides behind the ordinary, in small transfers, subtle changes, labels that don't belong. And there they were, transfers, small but persistent, labeled maintenance, emergency fund, repairs. I hadn't authorized them. I clicked further. The destination accounts weren't in my name. They were in Sophia's. She had quietly added herself as a secondary user, siphoning money slowly enough that I wouldn't notice immediately. This wasn't neglect or oversight. This was theft, calculated, deliberate, disguised as care. And Aaron? Was he blind? Or did he simply not care, as long as the money kept flowing? I leaned back in my chair, heart racing. Not from fear, but from clarity. They weren't planning to hurt me later. They were already doing it. They didn't call often. They rarely visited. I told myself they were busy, but the truth was simpler. I had made myself so useful that they stopped seeing me as a person by morning. My resolve had hardened. The clarity that had settled in during the night was no longer fragile. It was steel. For years, I had allowed myself to be invisible in my own life, letting their needs, their wants, their desires shape me. But now I couldn't unsee the truth. I called Mr. Caldwell, my longtime attorney. He had handled my affairs for years, my will, retirement planning, even the deed transfer when I gifted the house to Aaron and Sophia. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Hart, everything all right?" "No," I said calmly. "And that's why I need to see you today." There was a pause, not hesitation, just understanding. "Come in at 10. I'll clear my schedule." By 10, I was sitting across from him, hands folded neatly on my lap. I didn't need to explain much. He could already see the determination in my eyes. "I want to reverse the house transfer," I said plainly. "Lock every account. Cancel all powers of attorney. Freeze anything they might touch." He leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "This could cause tension," he said carefully. I met his gaze evenly. "They've already caused tension. I was just too blind to see it." He nodded. "Very well. We move quickly. Do you have evidence of financial abuse?" I slid a printed spreadsheet across the desk, the unauthorized transfers, the patterns, the accounts. "I have some. I want to gather more." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you open to hiring a private investigator?" I didn't hesitate. "Hire whoever we need." By afternoon, I returned home. The house looked the same, but everything felt different. Not the rooms, the furniture, or the sunlight, but me. The person who had been silent, grateful, compliant. She was gone. I sat at the kitchen table, letting the sun warm my hands. For the first time in weeks, they didn't tremble. I was no longer reacting, I was planning. Every action I had taken to help them, every hour, every dollar, every ounce of energy had been taken for granted. But I would not be taken for granted anymore. I organized the documents, locked down accounts, and prepared the evidence for Mr. Caldwell and the investigator. Each step was a reclaiming of my life. Every signature I canceled, every record I copied, every transaction I highlighted was a piece of the power I had lost, and was now regaining. Then I found it. A small envelope slipped under my front door. Plain, white, familiar. Sophia always used this kind of envelope for paperwork she helped organize. On top was a sticky note in her familiar looping handwriting. "Just sign whenever you're ready, Mom. This will make everything easier while we're away." The cruelty hit me with full force. They were already gone. Sipping cocktails on sapphire waters, smiling for photos, and assumed I would obey. I carefully opened the envelope. The documents inside were neat, professional, and seemingly harmless. Estate updates, minor authorizations. But one clause made my stomach turn. Permanent, irrevocable power of attorney. It would grant Sophia total control over my finances, property, medical decisions, everything, even the authority to place me in care without consent. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about control. And I wasn't going to let it happen. Inside the envelope were neatly typed legal documents, arranged to look completely harmless. At first glance, they appeared to be routine estate updates and minor household authorizations, documents I would have signed without a second thought in the past. But tonight, I was not that woman. I read every line with deliberate focus. By page 3, my stomach tightened. By page 5, my hands had gone cold. Buried deep in the legal jargon was a permanent, irrevocable power of attorney. It granted Sophia complete authority over everything I owned. My property, my finances, my medical decisions, even the right to admit me to care facilities without consent. They weren't waiting for me to age or weaken. They were planning to take everything while I was still alive. This wasn't about inheritance. This was about control. Total, calculated control. And the cruelest part? They assumed I would sign. Sophia had always smiled sweetly, wrapped manipulation in kindness. But this was a trap laid with professional precision. I set the papers back into the envelope and sealed it, not to obey, but to preserve evidence. Evidence of their plan, of the betrayal I had ignored for too long. For a long moment, I simply stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was listening to a quiet resolve building inside me. Then I whispered to the woman I had been for far too long. You almost signed this. A pause. Almost. But almost had saved me. By noon, I was back in Mr. Caldwell's office. This time, there was no fragile sadness. Only determination. He could see it immediately. I handed him the envelope. They tried to slip this past me while they're on a cruise, I said. He scanned it carefully, his brow furrowing when he reached the irrevocable clause. This is not just unethical, he said quietly. It's predatory. I nodded. If I had signed, they could have sold my home, emptied my accounts, even admitted me to a care facility, all while smiling at me. He studied me, waiting for panic. There was none. Let's accelerate everything, I said firmly. His expression shifted from concern to respect. We've already filed the reversal on the house deed. The asset freeze is underway. The investigator has begun a full financial audit, but after seeing this, he tapped the envelope. We'll take more aggressive action. Good. He added, I'm drafting a protective clause. If they attempt coercion, we'll have a full timeline ready for court. I nodded, feeling the strength settle into me like armor. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was building, strategically, methodically, and with a clarity they would never anticipate. When I returned home that afternoon, the house looked the same, but everything had changed. Not the furniture, not the sunlight. I had changed. The woman who had quietly funded everything, hoping to be loved, was gone. In her place stood someone who refused to be erased. Someone who had learned that peace doesn't come from acceptance. It comes from boundaries, strength, and knowing your worth. And now I was protecting both. For days later, the cruise ship returned. I was already waiting. I parked a block away, leaning against my car, watching quietly as Aaron and Sophia pulled up in their SUV, tan and relaxed, luggage piled high. Sophia stepped out first, barking instructions about mortgage finalizations, while Aaron trailed behind, absorbed in his phone. And then they froze. Two unfamiliar cars were in the driveway. A moving van. A young couple unloading boxes with a realtor overseeing everything. For a second, they just stared, processing the scene. Aaron was the first to speak, voice uncertain. Mom? Sophia's face tightened, confusion and panic mixing. What's going on? Who are these people? I walked forward, calm and composed. You won't have to manage anything here anymore. Sophia's voice rose. What do you mean? Aaron glanced around frantically. Why are there people in our house? I met his eyes evenly. It's not your house. Not anymore. Sophia stepped closer, almost aggressive. You can't do this. We're refinancing. There are contracts. I reached into my bag and handed Aaron a folder. Here are the only contracts that matter. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside were the house reversal papers, the sale documentation, the financial audit, and copies of unauthorized transactions. Sophia snatched the folder, scanning the papers like a drowning person looking for a lifeline. Her eyes blazed with fury. None of this will hold. We were helping you. You'll regret this. I held her gaze. You mean draining my accounts while smiling at me? Feeling legal authority behind my back? Listing my home as collateral while I sat in the dark? Aaron whispered, almost defensively, "We didn't mean." I raised my hand. "No, you didn't mean to get caught." Silence fell, the kind of silence heavier than shouting. I pulled out a second folder and handed it to Sophia. Inside were all the records. Forged signatures, proof of financial abuse, coercion, manipulation. "If you take me to court," I said calmly, "this becomes public record." They froze, pale, defeated, unable to speak. I looked at Aaron, my son, and spoke my final words. "I was your mother. You made me your target." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. Driving home, the sun dipped low behind the rooftops. My new apartment was modest. No marble countertops, no curated furniture, but it was mine. Fully mine. I placed my phone face down, ignoring Aaron's last text, a final plea masked as regret. I had nothing left to give. And in that emptiness, I discovered something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. They had assumed I would crumble without them. But the truth? I had been buried under their expectations for far too long. Quiet does not mean weak. Quiet means listening, observing, learning. And now, I speak only for myself. I entered my apartment and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the quiet settle. It was different now. Not the suffocating quiet of being ignored, but a calm, controlled silence. My hands, once trembling from fear and betrayal, now rested steadily on my sides. That evening, I walked to the small kitchen window and watched the streets below. Life continued outside as if nothing had happened. Yet everything inside me had shifted. I had taken back what was mine. My property, my finances, my dignity. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of control in my own hands. I unpacked a small bag, arranging the few personal belongings I had moved from the old house. Minimal, simple, yet wholly mine. The sense of ownership filled a void I didn't know had grown so large. It was no longer about possessions. It was about autonomy. About the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was no longer anyone's convenience or afterthought. Later that night, I received a message from Linda checking in. I smiled as I typed back a simple, confident reply. "Everything's under control." It was true. For the first time, I was in control of my life, not someone else's perception of me. A few hours later, I sat at my desk, reviewing the latest report from the investigator. The transactions, the transfers, the carefully hidden evidence of manipulation, all meticulously documented. It was almost poetic how clear the path had become. Each piece of proof was a step toward security and justice. As I leaned back in the chair, I reflected on the years I had spent trying to be invisible. I had devoted myself to raising Aaron, to supporting him and Sophia, to helping in ways that should have been acts of love, but had been taken for granted. Every dinner I cooked, every corner I decorated, every dollar spent had gone unnoticed as part of their expectation. But now the tables had turned. I was no longer invisible. They would have to see me, not as a mother to serve or a grandmother to indulge, but as a person who could act decisively, who would not be taken for granted, and who would not be controlled. For the first time, I felt the true meaning of freedom. Not the absence of responsibilities, but the presence of choice. I could choose who entered my life, what influence they had over me, and how I allowed myself to be treated. I made a promise to myself that night. Never again would I allow anyone to undermine my independence. Later, I went to bed with a quiet confidence I had never known. The fear, the anxiety, the betrayal, they were still there, shadows in the corners, but they no longer controlled me. I had reclaimed my life in every way that mattered. And I knew this was just the beginning. This newfound strength, this clear sense of self-worth, would guide me through the coming days. The future was uncertain, yes, but I would face it on my own terms, with the clarity and courage I had finally found. For the first time in a long time, I was truly free the next morning. I stood in front of my apartment mirror, adjusting my scarf with a calm I hadn't felt in years. There was a softness in my eyes, but also a spark, a readiness for whatever came next. For the first time, I wasn't trying to please anyone or hide my feelings. I was ready to face my life on my own terms. I arrived at the office, telling myself I would maintain distance from Aaron and Sophia, at least today, but fate had other plans. As I walked past the reception, I saw Aaron coming toward me. "Good morning, Evelyn," he said. I forced a professional smile. "Good morning, Aaron." He immediately noticed something different. I was distant, yes, but also composed, self-assured. "You okay?" he asked, concern hidden in his calm voice. "Yes," I said quietly and walked ahead. Later, in the meeting room, I struggled to focus. My mind kept drifting to last night, to the confrontation, to the empowerment I had finally claimed. Then, during a presentation, Aaron asked me a question. "Evelyn, what's your perspective on this?" I hesitated, taken aback. "Could you repeat that slide, please?" He smiled faintly and repeated it. I answered, but he noticed. My mind was elsewhere, my heart unsettled. After the meeting, he called me aside. "Evelyn, 1 minute," he said. I took a deep breath. "Sir, if this is about work, we can discuss it later." "No," he said softly. "This is personal. I need to know. Why are you avoiding me?" I lowered my eyes. I'm not avoiding you. I just need time." Aaron stepped closer, his voice steady. "Your hesitation tells me more than words ever could. The fact that you're confused means there's something here. If you felt nothing, you wouldn't react this way." My chest tightened. I whispered, "I'm scared." He didn't flinch. "I will never be the reason for your fear. I'm not here to complicate your life. I'm here to be honest about mine." I lifted my eyes, meeting his for the first time without pretense. There was no teasing, no mischief, only